Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. Well, I want to bring in a couple conversations I've had with different people about a philosophy or a theory that I've tried to tell you all about, and that is big fish eat big fish. Big fish eat big fish. I told you that a month ago I caught a monster bass while I was fishing for northern pike. And then when I opened the mouth of that bass, I saw two giant tails sticking out of its stomach. Just the tails were still there that were protruding up into its mouth, hadn't been digested yet. But they were from big fish, and I'm thinking, holy cow, what has this thing been eating? Well, I talked to my buddy Jonathan Robila, and he told me about how he has witnessed bass bass were probably 5 or 6 pounds, but these bass actually are eating carp in the pond that he has. And these bass eat giant, what I would think of as bait, 12 and 14-inch trout like they were nothing. He says they'll just engulf them, they go down into their crushers and they start to grind them up. And they'll eat these great big baits. And remember, there's companies right now making huge baits, and most fishermen still, they think, who would ever use something like that? What are they going to fish for? Well, they're making them for bass. But here's the flip side of that story. The very flip side. I was in Dick's Sporting Goods a week ago, and I was talking to one of the salespeople, the people that work there in the sporting goods, and he comes up to me and he says, "Oh my gosh, I grew up watching your TV show," which of course made me feel wonderful. At that point, he was my buddy. And we were talking about fish that he fishes, and he fishes tournaments and everything. He's probably a much better fisherman than I am. But he said, "I watched your shows that you did with veterans where you were fishing up near Messina. You were fishing on the Grass River." And he says, he said, "I came up and fished." And he says, "Believe it or not, I caught the biggest muskie on a tiny little crankbait I was using." And I thought, wow. And then I thought to my conversation with Mike Bean this week, where he went out behind the golf course in Waddington searching for crappies, and he caught these huge pike. And I said, "Mike, you're telling me that these pike were hitting your little crappie jigs?" And he said, "Absolutely." And I got to tell you, the picture of these pike were bigger than pike that I catch most years ever. And I fish for pike all the time. And they'd hit these tiny little baits. Well, then I was talking with Jonathan Robila, who had made a trip down to Texas a month or so ago, has relatives down there, and they were fishing one of the lakes down there. And he caught a bass of a lifetime, the biggest. He showed me video of him catching this fish. The biggest bass I've ever seen, the biggest bass he ever thought existed. It weighed almost 14 pounds, and it was all spawned out. It would have weighed much, much more if it hadn't just spawned. And what did he catch it on? I said, "Jonathan, tell me, you must have been using huge bait." He said, "I was using a tiny little square-billed crankbait when this thing hit." So over and over again, last summer, I spent most of my time fishing the Grass River with tiny, either a fly rod and a woolly bugger or tiny little Z-Man 2-inch baits, 2-inch finesse baits. And almost every time I'd go out, I'd have a muskie strike one of these tiny little baits. And then I'd be waiting in the water, no net, no way. And I'm thinking, why? The dream fish of a lifetime do I always catch when I'm fishing for bass on tiny little baits. Point being, remember, big fish will eat big fish, and big fish will eat tiny little fish. So no matter what bait you choose and select, you always have a chance of catching a trophy. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.